Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the EPI Insiders Bash. I have our first speaker with us today. You can see her on our screen. Her name is Laura Queen. She is the founder and CEO of 29Bison. I'm sure she'll explain that name at some point. I certainly asked about her, and a lot of the EPI staff has as well. We're really excited to have her. So she is a human capital advisor. And for me, and for a lot of the CEPAs on the call, we learned the 4 intangible capitals, one of the core concepts of everything value acceleration for us. And for me, it's the most important. It's near and dear to my heart. And I know that for me at EPI, whether it's the pivot that we did in the last 6 months or the growth that we've had, the success is because of the people that surround me. And human capital is something that we invest a lot in. And I think it's one of the things that we don't talk in the EPI community enough about. So with that, Laura, take it away, your show, and we're all real excited to have you. So thank you for being here.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thrilled to be here. Very excited to be a part of the EPI community. I will say before I begin, please feel free to use the chat. I'll do the best I can to answer questions here. If not, we'll certainly have time when we're all back together again around 1, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone who has specific questions after today. Happy to answer or provide advice and support as needed. To introduce a bit about who we are, I am going to save how the name came to be and what it means until later on, so we'll leave you all in suspense about that for a little bit. But we are transaction advisors. Our focus is human capital. We work with owners and investors, we work with owners and investors in the middle market and lower middle market to mitigate risk, create value, and accelerate growth, primarily through people. I and my partners built 29Bison after careers in large, small public and private organizations, all of whom had some stated objective to grow through acquisition, and after completing more than about $50 billion of global transactions on both the buy and the sell side, we followed our passion for building great businesses and looked to improving long-term transaction outcomes through people. Just in keeping a little bit with making sure that we're learning from our experiences yesterday, I wanted to pull a page out of a conversation that Scott was having with Christine Hollenden yesterday, and all of you can read my bio and my background on LinkedIn if you're interested, but I thought it might be more interesting to develop a little bit of rapport and relationship by sharing a bit about who I am and things that most people probably don't know about me. In a past life, I was a competitive sailor, and despite being only 5 feet 3 inches tall, I was also a competitive varsity volleyball player in college. I am now a skier, a perpetual student. I love learning. I'm a voracious reader. We love to camp, we whitewater raft, and I have to say my absolute favorite vacation of all time was last summer spent on the Salmon River in Idaho, whitewater rafting for 92 miles over 6 days. It was just an incredible experience. I love wine, and Linda Ruffinack and I have already connected with each other as fellow brown liquor gals, so I'm thrilled to be among people who have similar passions. Let's situate ourselves a little bit in today's conversation. So we are all living in a time of COVID-19, social unrest, racial injustice, and an emerging multi-stakeholder view of the economy. The Business Roundtable and the SEC are focused on sustainability, purpose, and people as measures of corporate value. Stakeholders are looking at companies' people practices as indicators of their ethics, values, and integrity. Consumers are making buying decisions, employees are making career choices, and prospective acquirers and investors are selecting opportunities on the basis of your client's reputation. You need look no further than Glassdoor, Rate My Professor, or Angie's List for confirmation. Our learning objectives for the next hour or so are: 1, to understand the role of human capital in corporate value creation, to explore the interaction of the 4 C's in relation to human capital, to survey some actionable measures organizations and advisors may take to reduce risk and increase value through human capital, and some other intangible assets, and we'll talk about how they all connect to each other. and to provide exposure to some tools to assist advisors and business owners in evaluating and benchmarking human capital and financial performance in private businesses. So, why the people-profit paradox? A paradox requires embracing the ability to hold two or more opposing points of view in mind at the same time. Businesses, and specifically accounting, has pitted people against profits for at least a generation. Today, we're going to embrace this paradox, or at least I invite you to do so, and play with the idea that people and profits are more deeply connected than you may have expected. Our focus for today's conversation will be human capital, people, and the contribution of people to value creation and growth. And contrary to long-held views, we are not dealing with a fixed pie. So let's talk about using the 4C framework to ground us. We're going to define a couple of our terms. And for these purposes, we define some of these terms slightly differently than in the 4C framework. And we're using specifically the International Integrated Reporting Council's definitions of some of these terms. We'll look at intellectual capital, human capital, social and relationship capital, but they all fit within the 4C framework. So for our purposes, intellectual capital is organizational, knowledge-based intangibles, including intellectual property, things like patents, copyright, software, rights and licenses, and organizational capital such as tacit knowledge, systems, procedures, and protocols. We're defining human capital as people's competencies, capabilities, and experience, and their motivations to innovate, including alignment with and support for an organization's governance framework, the risk management approach, ethical values, their ability to understand, develop, and implement an organization strategy, loyalties and motivations for improving processes, goods, and services, including their ability to lead, manage, and collaborate. And we're looking at social capital and relational capital as the institutions and relationships within and between communities, their groups of stakeholders, stakeholder networks, ability to share information that enhances individual and collective well-being. This includes things like shared norms, common values and behaviors, key stakeholder relationships, and very importantly, trust. In addition, I'll share a term that we've coined and its definition. So we talk about people alpha as the excess returns available to owners and investors through recognizing employees as true business assets and applying a systematic approach to human capital management. And we'll talk a little further along about what exactly that means. But taking these concepts of the 4 C's one step further allows you to look at the value you receive from your investments in human capital and people. And for business owners, this would be seen as increased exit multiples. For private equity, this would be seen as higher IRR and or higher secondary exit multiples. Increasing people alpha begins with assessing the values of your business and conducting periodic inventories on an ongoing basis. You'll recognize that in the retail community, that kind of inventory process is something that happens at least annually, sometimes more frequently than that. When was the last time you or your clients inventoried their business practices, especially human, social, and customer capital? They all are interrelated, and there's a complex interaction between them. These inventories or audits can consist of 2 general categories of information, one on the risk mitigation side and the other on the value creation side. These categories are somewhat arbitrary, and the areas that you focus on can represent risk and generate value on either side. So one is not necessarily mutually exclusive of the other. When identified early and addressed well, each of these elements contributes to both value creation or value depletion and your ability to generate people alpha. From a risk mitigation standpoint, we're talking about things like compliance, key vacancies and the loss of individuals in critical positions, key talent to those individuals that are high performing, have very strong customer relationships, are tied to the creation of intellectual property or intellectual capital for the business. key policies and procedures, and the ability to achieve at or greater than standards, expected standards and expectations. On the value creation side, we look at things like purpose and culture, legacy and the legitimacy of the business, business reputation, an employer brand, performance and productivity, both from a human capital standpoint and then from an organizational standpoint, employee engagement, levels of diversity, inclusion, and equity, individual and organizational skills and capabilities, transaction readiness or growth readiness, and whether or not there are documented transition plans. For a minute, let's take a marketplace view of this. In a world of exits and purchases, buyers and sellers each have a particular perspective. As you move through the process, it's beneficial to periodically look at the situation from the other point of view. This serves as a guidepost for making sure that your actions are aligned with your intended outcomes and helps to reinforce your operations and investment strategies. As a seller, no matter how much effort is put into the day-to-day operations, ultimately your business is only worth as much as a buyer or investor is willing to pay for it. And what we're seeing is the marketplace is shifting. If we look at this from the sell side, a seller is looking potentially for higher valuations, larger multiples, growth opportunity, the preservation of a legacy, continuity for stakeholders, most specifically employees and customers, making sure that there's continuity with your customer relationships, and a smooth and quick transition. On the buy side, you're looking for upside potential, market relevance, a strong management team, low risk, a fair price for the value of the business, a solid brand, strong pipeline, high performance and productivity. Let's talk about what we're seeing in the headlines right now. So for those of you that had the opportunity to hear Fred Johnson speak yesterday, you will know that he talked quite a bit about the value of purpose. And you'll be interested to know, although I don't highlight it specifically here, there is really compelling evidence that organizations that operate with a specific and stated purpose actually achieve higher levels of return over time for those business. Individuals are more likely to be engaged working for an organization that has a firm and compelling purpose that gives them meaning beyond just the job that they do to earn their living. What we're hearing is this shift in the marketplace. So those of you that have followed the news around things like ESG, diversity and inclusion, and brand reputation, you'll know that there's this movement happening, and even the Business Roundtable, as recently as last year, put forward a restatement of the purpose of a corporation. Among the things they said in that particular statement is that investing in our employees, this starts with compensating them fairly and providing important benefits, includes supporting them through training and education that help develop new skills in a rapidly changing world. Fostering diversity, inclusion, dignity, and respect are all part of the purpose of that organization. What we're also finding is really interesting is that more and more acquirers, strategic acquirers, general partners, and limited partners, including direct investors, so think family offices that are doing direct investment in business, are taking these factors into consideration. Consumer sentiment is shifting towards sustainability and stewardship. And it's interesting to know that these elements are all factored into business operations and culture from the standpoint of the external or multi-stakeholder view of the value of an organization. I'd be interested to know how many of you, and feel free to put this in your chat, how many of you have chosen to, in the last year, eat at a restaurant on the basis of a Yelp or OpenTable rating, contacted a service provider because of their Angie's List rating, or elected to buy from or divest your shares of a business because of a headline news article? I had an interesting thing sort of happen yesterday. as I was looking at my LinkedIn post, and I don't know whether all of you will be able to see this, but I happened to see this LinkedIn post. So there's a picture here of a truck from In-N-Out Burger. And the individual that posted this is not an In-N-Out Burger employee. But what he's highlighting is that there's a 1-800 number on the side of the In-N-Out Burger truck to report incidences of human trafficking. So In-N-Out Burger, apparently, I didn't know this until yesterday, has a very strong set of principles about making sure that people are free. So I took 5 minutes and I looked online to see what their corporate values are. And in their corporate values, they have a supplier supply chain agreement. The first piece of which says, we require every In-N-Out supplier to affirm as part of our supplier agreement that it is not engaged in any type of human trafficking, human rights violations, or other illegal or unfair labor practices. Then I looked on Glassdoor to see what Glassdoor looks like. And their employees overall identify them as 4.4 stars on Glassdoor, and they're highlighted as a 2019 best places to work. And I imagine that for individuals that are interested in being employed by, investing in, or being a part of a community of suppliers that is supplying to this organization, all of those things are creating reputational capital and trust in the validity of that organization and their experience with that organization. All of that creates or potentially erodes value in an organization. So let's talk about the concept of culture and how it relates to all of this. Where does culture come from and how is it measured? Well, it stems from purpose. Answering why your business exists, what it produces, its service, its products, its technology, its experience, how the work gets done, its activities, the environment, and its values. So what is culture? An organization culture can be seen in the assumptions a person makes about the groups in which they participate. So have they chosen to be a part of the organization? How engaged in the organization are they? These assumptions making up the culture are grouped into 3 levels, each becoming more difficult to articulate and change. Every organization has a culture, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Organizational cultures are neither inherently bad nor good. They may, however, be intentional or unintentional. Intentional cultures are marked by obvious artifacts such as prominent mission or purpose statements, clearly articulated employee value propositions, internal operating structures such as policies, procedures, governance structures, and certainly statements like the In-N-Out Burger statement around its supplier relationships. Unintentional cultures tend to feel less formal or codified, but may be just as obvious or identifiable and even more embedded. Where is culture? Culture lives in organization artifacts and people's experiences. This is a differential impact on culture emanating from the most senior leaders and cascading through an organization. Culture is, generally speaking, not a bottom-up artifact. It is something that comes from the overarching viewpoints and value structures that happen at the top of an organization and then are role modeled in other aspects or areas of an organization. There are many ways to measure culture. The most recognizable is via employee engagement surveys. What are artifacts? The artifacts are the things you experience with your senses. It's the language, the storytelling, the styles of interaction, published statements about the values, the mission, the vision of an organization. It's espoused beliefs and values, the ideals, the goals, and the aspirations of the business, of a manager, of a department, or a team. The basic underlying beliefs of an organization, those taken for granted conditions or experiences in a business. These are the assumptions that are evident in systems and attributes such as missions, goals derived from the mission, the measurement resulting from the correction mechanisms. So is there a constant coaching? is an organization being operated in a reasonably transparent manner, or is a closed door philosophy about employee communications something that is endemic or part of the business? And what are the remedial or repair strategies? What do we do if something breaks? How is it that we handle making mistakes? How do we address risk or decision making? And what are the means to achieving goals, structures, systems, and processes? Do we cascade them? Do we share them? Do we invite members of our team to participate in the process of goal setting? Employees' experience of culture is largely defined by their relationships with and to their most immediate manager or supervisor. If you take a look at the Glassdoor entries, including the ones I looked at In-N-Out Burger last night, you'll see that in many cases, those individuals who are making statements about the organization talk about it as a whole, and then specifically make reference to their relationship with a manager, a supervisor, their ability to succeed in the organization, to be promoted, or to be recognized for the value they contribute on the basis of their most immediate supervisory relationship. Oftentimes you'll see statements such as, I love this organization, our CEO is fabulous, and we get free coffee and donuts on Friday, but I'm leaving because my manager is a snake who only gives raises to his favorites and his buddies, which is an incredibly unfortunate circumstance, but happens more than many organizations would like to admit. So why does all of this matter anyway? Well, it matters because disengaged employees cost you money. They are less productive, lower performing, more likely to cause retail shrink, fudge their hours. They have higher levels of absenteeism, are more frequently sick, may actively sow discontent among other employees. My grandmother used to tell me one rotten apple spoils the bunch, and in the context of value creation from an employee standpoint, she was right. Conversely, strong cultures, those promoting fairness, equity, providing opportunity, physically and psychologically safe work environments, those that promote learning and job enrichment, connect people with the purpose of an organization, and allow the autonomy generate value, excess value, in fact, what we're calling people alpha. One of my favorite authors on this topic is Alex Edmonds, who is a professor at the London School of Business. And he's conducted multiple pieces of research about this. But in one of his more famous pieces, he says, he was able to identify that organizations who were listed on the 100 best companies to work for in America list, which is the Fortune 100 list, delivered stock returns that beat their peers by an average of 2.3 to 3.8% per year over a 28-year period, 89% to 184% cumulative. Now, mind you, he's looking at organizations that are publicly traded. However, there are lots of other organizations that are looking at value creation in both material and not quite so material ways in the private sector, and finding that it is also contributing to substantial value creation in their businesses. There is a question about the idea of materiality and what, from a human capital measurement standpoint, organizations should be attending to. This is a place where you'll see, if you're watching the news, there's a lot of consternation, because although the SEC, for example, has just modernized their Reg SK rulings, including human capital measurement on publicly traded organizations 10Ks, and for those organizations that are seeking an exit to an IPO, they would have to also make this disclosure. The guidance that the SEC is providing is saying it needs to be material to that business. Well, how do you determine materiality? One of the ways of doing that is being explored more extensively by SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and there are frameworks that are being built inside of their human capital management project. There is an integrated reporting framework that's produced by the IIRC, the EPIC group, which is partly being an emergence of Ernst & Young and a group of other multi-stakeholder investors, are all saying that materiality is important, and I think we'll begin to see more and more around that. But a great place to go if you're looking for some guidance is the already existing SASB materiality map. And in addition, you can look to the currently existing ISO standards for human capital reporting, ISO 3414, and most of those resources are all included in this piece at the end. So we've given you the information so that you can take a look at some of those pieces on your own. So I'm sharing this with you. I posed a word problem to a dear friend and colleague who is a highly regarded corporate valuation expert and is near and dear to our hearts. And I'll share this little word problem. ABC Manufacturing refurbishes both their men's and their ladies' room in a leased building. They include state-of-the-art fixtures. The capital investment costs $150,000. The CFO chose to contract with the top bidder because he was a local guy and the cousin of the head of facilities maintenance. The only way they could afford the higher bid was to reduce the training and professional development budget to near zero for the year, but they got it done. 3 years later, ABC Manufacturing was sold to a PE firm as part of a roll-up and they moved out of the building. All of the employees were retained in the transaction. How is the capital expenditure for the leasehold improvements, the toilets, treated, and what is the value contribution to the business? His answer to me was, the new toilets are fully depreciated at the time of the sale, no value. My question to all of us is, barring the fact that the employees may have been happier with their experience of the new bathrooms, this scenario may have destroyed value for ABC Manufacturing. But why? Unfortunately, this trade-off is made every day, largely because we still operate under a balance sheet model of accounting for the value of intangible assets. You can see in this quote from a recent IFAC AICPA white paper that there is a call to action to change this frame of reference. The question is, can you measure human capital contribution? Sorry. And the answer to that is yes. There are tools and methods to do so. From a value creation standpoint, we recommend these two measures be tracked on an ongoing basis, augmented by specific business relevant KPIs. There are a number of tools available to help provide guidance and direction. Sorry, that was a lot of feedback. And we referenced earlier the ISO 3414 guidelines in human capital management adopted in December of 2018. These are considered to be the gold standard. In our work, we also use human capital value add in addition to human capital ROI, just basic measures of the value being created in a business through human capital. So let's give a brief case study example. So in this particular case study, we were working with an organization that's a specialty marketing company in life sciences. They had a tremendous brand reputation marked by high customer satisfaction, very strong recurring revenues, and a highly consistent sales pipeline. Behind the scenes, however, the company was beset by a very divisive culture in which the three minority shareholders in the business operated in silos. They consistently failed to convey a unified vision for the business or to put in place a transparent succession plan. Over time, this led to low employee morale, high turnover among some of their key contributors, including their highest paid and most, I would say, prolific business development person, and 3 failed processes to sell their company over a 10-year period. We were brought in to help the organization address cultural issues that were being flagged by the prospective buyers as problem areas. The challenges, so part of what we do, and you've heard reference to this over the last couple of days, is a bit of the ugly baby work. So we went in and took a look at the organization. There were overpaid executives, underpaid internal talent. We included compensation benchmarking. conducted a comprehensive HR audit similar to the buy-side due diligence kinds of work you might see to understand more completely what was happening in the business from a human capital, human resources management standpoint. We worked with this group to identify multiple internal strategies, looking at possible paths forward with all of the key stakeholders in the business, and iterated on those potential strategic operating opportunities for them. One included a management buyout, one included just a hunkering down and keeping the business moving forward, making some significant changes to the way the business was being operated in the hope that we would be able to achieve growth. One included just a status quo for a period of time. They were turning over cash, and so from that standpoint, if they stayed in the business, remained in the business for a longer period of time than they had originally desired, they would have been able to achieve a decent exit, but it would have taken them a longer period of time to do that. But the end result would have been primarily winding down the business or going back to the market and seeking a potential exit. We conducted comprehensive talent assessments using a targeted panel of valid, reliable assessments, provided feedback and coaching to every member of their staff as part of the initial overall evaluation of the business, and used that information as well as their ultimate strategic design as part of the new organization design process and strategic planning. Our mission was to diagnose the organization, to conduct their leadership assessment, to develop their business and exit strategies, to put in place succession planning, and to conduct alongside them eventually a sell-side due diligence. In the process of strategic planning, we developed 3 parallel paths, finally, inclusive of a strategic sale, a private equity investment, or a partial ESOP. Eventually, they decided that the ESOP didn't make sense for them, and so we looked at strategic sale or the possibility of a PE investment. We created corresponding business strategies and action plans for each alternative, recruited and collaborated with an investment bank for valuation modeling and brokerage services, identified and vetted partners, investors, and acquirers, helped identify their most desirable path, which was the sale to a strategic based on financial and cultural objectives. We worked alongside them to refine and document their vital internal processes and roles. We were able to recruit key talent to fill the vacancy that was created when their primary business development person left the organization. We helped them to redesign and overhaul the corporate compensation structure, put in place a phantom equity plan to align the interests of those individuals that A, needed to remain with the organization for a period of transition, and B, had previously been promised that they would have some level of equity shares in the business. And we helped them work alongside other necessary governance structures for the organization, the implementation of processes and procedures, documentation of job descriptions, and then eventually worked alongside them as they were going through due diligence. They did not have an embedded human capital capability, dedicated HR person in the organization. So we effectively worked as their proxy for the human capital or human resources related due diligence as they were moving through the transaction phases. The story ended pretty well. 22 months of engagement, 100% retention for all active employees at the time of the transaction. They were sold to a strategic acquirer, and actually a really phenomenal strategic acquirer, I have to say. We've been in touch with them since then. The employees are really happy, and a particular component of this transaction was an internally built software capability that really had the opportunity to be a stellar value contributor to a business if there were the right sets of people, developers, and creative mindsets, and an influx of capital to help the development. They've been able to put that now, software development on steroids, working with a strategic acquirer, both for the benefit of the acquirer and for the benefit of this particular group who is embedded in the creation and utilization of this technology, which is really stellar. 62% growth in the sales pipeline during the 22 months we were engaged with them. 100% increase over the highest previous bid for the assets, and we took them 14 months from marketing their original business to the close of their transaction. So human capital is often considered squishy and nebulous. It doesn't have to be, and we've already discussed people and the people processes and how they figure largely into the creation and erosion of value across the 4 C's, social, customer, human capital, and some of those other intangible assets. Getting a handle on all of this information for education and illustration purposes and creating an actionable plan requires both quantitative and qualitative measurement. For these reasons, we as an organization built a tool called AlphaCalc. We use this first of its kind business intelligence platform for all of our client engagements, including the case study I just shared with you. We do it for both buy-side and sell-side clients. AlphaCalc combines measures of both financial performance and human capital, and it benchmarks data from more than 1 million US private companies alongside labor market data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics to evaluate a company's current business performance. It also helps us to highlight specific and immediately actionable items for improved business performance. What you're seeing here are some samples of the outputs that come out of the AlphaCalc platform. And what we have found particularly helpful is situating business owners, advisors, investors in the conversation around both the financial importance and impacts performance of a business, but also the human capital component side by side to begin to see how they are interrelated with one another. Throughout the Insider's Bash, you've been introduced to tools and processes that enable your exit planning activities. Those of you who may have an interest in learning more about these can certainly check out alphacalc.com. You'll see the connection in the resources. Check out the website, or certainly send me a note, share your contact information. We'd be more than happy to reach out. And now some quick takeaways about the case study. So some of the things we want to highlight about making sure that an organization addresses areas where there are compliance concerns or risks related to value depletion in an organization or an inability to effectively manage their way through to a transition or transaction or even a recapitalization for the business, and or identify areas of opportunity for growth and certainly value creation. And I would arguably say, because it's something that's near and dear to our heart, an improved employee experience of an organization include making sure you start with an HR audit. If not ours, there are others out there that are available to just go through the process of identifying what capabilities currently exist, where there are opportunities for improved internal processes. Talent assessment, the development and use of standard protocols using validated and reliable tools to assess talent in an organization. Organization design tied to strategy. In this case, we tied all of the org design specifically to the most probable and possible strategic outcomes for this particular client. Blocking and tackling, get the basics down, policies, processes, procedures, documentation, internal knowledge sharing opportunities. In this particular case study, one of the owners, the original founder of the business, was in his late 60s. It was his second bite at the apple. He had had a previous very successful exit and was tired. He just wanted out of the business. The problem was they had done virtually nothing from a succession planning standpoint, and they had not done anything to document their internal processes and procedures. There was no way an acquirer was going to allow them to exit the business the moment an acquisition happened. They needed some significant period of transition in order to ensure that client relationships were being managed with continuity, that internal administrative processes were being handled effectively, that documentation around, some of their business was very nuanced, and some of the nuances of the business were being cataloged so that other people could step in at some point later and pick up where these owners were leaving off. Certainly ensuring compliance. We worked with them again to prep for due diligence and to prepare them for growth, particularly as we got to the place where it looked like the organization was going to be picked up by an acquirer. Part of the coaching we were doing alongside the entire business was situating themselves for what life was going to look like inside of a corporate environment. For one of the owners, he had never worked in a corporate environment previously, and had some significant misgivings about what that was going to look and feel like for him. And so, and he was integral. He was the mastermind behind the technology that was being utilized, which of course was of the greatest value to the acquirer. So helping to go through the process of situating them for that opportunity and making sure that they understood what their experience was going to look like post closing was pretty important for us. Document the vision for what's next for all team members, and really critically, communication, transparency, turning over all of the rocks and making sure that you're getting the team on the same page. This was very difficult in this specific example. This organization was marked by a very siloed communication capability. There were kind of factions in the business, and they were not speaking with each other either in a transparent manner or sharing material information across various sides of the business. And so really important to bring people together and make sure that they were having difficult conversations with each other about desires, expectations, demands, even to the point of having to go through the conversation about who was going to be getting what share of the business and what their expectations for salaries were. And we sat down with them and facilitated those conversations. So communication and transparency is absolutely essential in order to get to a really good, solid outcome. And then we'd like to share just a few of the resources we've talked about. You can take a look at some of these. I would suggest, if you haven't read it, it's great. Grow the Pie, Alex Edmonds' newest book. He really does an incredible job of talking about the idea around value creation and embracing this idea that a rising tide raises all boats, rather than a more, I'll say, Milton Friedman early view about the purpose of organizations being purely profit and shareholder value. There's also links in here, by the way, to the IFAC, the 2 IFAC pieces. I think they're particularly interesting for those individuals and organizations that have had a view about the role of the CFO. The most current IFAC piece about the emerging role, or the evolving role of the CFO in relation to understanding the value created through intangible assets and being a partner to the business and making sure that a multi-stakeholder view is predominant is really important. So with that, I thank you all for your time. I invite you to reach out to me, to us. We'd be more than happy to have conversations with any of you about this content or anything else we might be able to share at some point in the future.
Laura, thank you very, very much. So we have about 5 minutes. So a couple of, I guess, questions I'd like to talk to right now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And so when you're talking through this process, I'm trying to summarize maybe a couple of questions that I have here that kind of relate. Is when you come in, how are you getting, I guess, employees? I guess let's back up. How transparent is the exit planning process to employees, in your opinion, or what would you recommend?
So my recommendation is, to the extent, particularly if you're working in smaller organizations, to the extent that you can get everyone in a room to talk about what that process might be or the intention of working through this process, the smoother and the more, the greater the value creation opportunity is for an organization. Recognizing, by the way, that that's not always possible. But in this case, in the case of the case study I shared with you, there were 9 employees, and we actually sat down. Our very first meeting was to sit down with all 9 employees and say, your business has gone through 3 failed transactions prior to our coming in. Here is the stated objective. The owners had come to us and said, listen, we need to do something different. We don't really want to be operating this business the way we've been operating it. We think we would like to transact it. How are we going to do that? And so we actually put all 9 employees together, and they were part of the creation of the strategy, the go forward strategy for this business from the very beginning.
So, and then, and so the employees then, once kind of, so you've explained the process to them. Are they, how's the buy-in process? This is like, I mean, like when you're going through a SEPA training program and we're talking about this value acceleration methodology, this question always comes up. So having an expert like yourself online with us today, how are we getting the buy-in from the employees along the way?
Right. So for us, we actually use multiple techniques, but one of the techniques we invariably start with is built off of the appreciative inquiry framework. And so if you don't know it and you're interested in learning more about it, shoot me a note. I'd be more than happy to share it with you. But effectively what it does is helps individuals and organizations or teams go through a process of identifying and kind of interrogating the reality of their circumstance currently, and then moving very quickly in a positive framework toward what is the desired future state of the organization, and then calibrating that. You do it individually and then you do it together, and calibrating those pieces together using unconditionally positive view toward the future. And the interesting thing is it feels relatively unnatural when you're doing it. We are very accustomed to processes, particularly project management processes, that look for the gaps in everything. How is it that we identify the gap and how do we solve the gap? And in this case, we actually we walk away from the idea of gaps. Our view is to help understand what the strengths and capabilities of an organization and a team are, to understand what their tools and their innate qualities and qualifications are, and use those things to be able to build toward a better future. And so in this case, we were able to help this team say, what are the things we do really well? Where have our historical successes been? What is it about the work that we're doing, the world that we're in, that appeals most to our clients? On what basis is it that we have established this reputation we have in the external marketplace, which was incredibly strong, and use that as the framework for helping to determine what the next steps are. And just by virtue of bringing other people into that conversation, you elicit A, trust in the process, and B, buy-in for what happens next, even if their idea isn't the idea that is picked up long term.
Right. So one last question, and I'm going to save the rest for our speaker meetup. But how do you address the fears or the reality that some employees might have that they might lose their job upon this exit or transition? So how do you communicate this, particularly in a large organization?
Yeah. So again, I will say transparency first and foremost. The other thing that I will say, and I have said throughout my career, both my career as a corporate executive and my career as an advisor, say only what you know and don't make promises. So if you don't know what's going to happen after this, help people situate themselves for multiple versions of the reality later on. Put them in a place where they feel comfortable and confident that at least you're telling them as much as you know at that point in time, but you're not making the mistake of promising them that their jobs won't change, or that their salaries won't change, or that their supervisors won't change. People need reassurance, but mostly what they need is to be able to trust in what you say. And that's the way to help situate them for those conversations.